tyrannies, despotic leaders. So to have a monarch which is able to make that transition from the monarchy of Henry VIII and Elizabeth. Interesting, by the way, how many of our great monarchs have been women, picking up what that girl was saying with Elizabeth I, Queen Victoria and Queen Elizabeth II. That there's been this unique ability in Britain to have a monarchy which is still relevant today. And look at the crowds, look at the millions tuning in.
Sir Anthony, we are receiving shots from inside as the Accession Council gathers here in St James's Palace. Let's bring in our royal commentator, Alistair Bruce. Alistair, just describe that gathering for us.
Well, it is a gathering of people who have held or do hold considerable weight and power in the story of the United Kingdom. And they're gathering for the first part of the Accession Council. They're referred to generally as the Lords of the Council, who are added to by representatives of the Commonwealth and by archbishops of Canterbury and former archbishops and other appointments, including from the City of London by old tradition going back to the days of Queen Elizabeth I. And they're gathered here to witness the first part of this council. Normally, privy councils, the word privy is where the secret of it is, where private. Former Archbishop of Canterbury there and of York. And they, all of them, have held an appointment and therefore can witness the procedure that we will see. At the allotted point, the current acting Lord President of the Council, who is the Right Honourable Penny Mordaunt, I say acting, her appointment was approved by the late Queen, and she will lead the Council now. And other members of the royal family who are gathered, along with privy councillors who are selected, the Archbishop of Canterbury and others will sign the proclamation, ending up with the Earl Marshal and the Lord President herself. At this point there will be other business, and then the privy councillors who are going to go and meet the King will leave this picture gallery and head through to the throne room.
And Alistair, we're just seeing for ourselves some of the makeup of the Privy Council, just how high octane it is in terms of the politicians, all those former Prime Ministers for a start.
Former Prime Ministers, of course, and also the leaders of the opposition and the heads of the other significant parties, and also representatives from different parts of the United Kingdom, but all those who have been granted the privilege of becoming sworn as members of the Most Honourable, the Privy Council. And Privy Council rules dictate that there should be cross-party capability of people to talk about things in complete secrecy, and thereby some of the function of the most difficult moments of the national story can be done by agreement being reached outside the public forum. So that's one of the rules. But you can see there people who we regularly hear from because they currently have held, more recently, cabinet appointments or hold them right now. But just because the Queen, the late Queen, had approved the current cabinet, they haven't all been received by the monarch, and so that needs to be done shortly. Let's listen.
It's 10 o'clock, you're watching Sky News live from St James's Palace in central London, where the historic meeting of the Accession Council is just about to begin.
The business for part one of the Council. My Lords, it is my sad duty to inform you that Her Most Gracious Majesty, Queen Elizabeth II, has passed away on Thursday, the 8th of September, 2022, at Balmoral Castle. I propose that, when certain necessary business has been transacted, a deputation consisting of Her Majesty, His Royal Highness, the Archbishop of Canterbury, the Lord Chancellor, the Archbishop of York, the Prime Minister, the Clerk of the Council, and myself, shall wait on the King and inform him the Council is assembled. I now call on the Clerk of the Council to read aloud the text of the proclamation.
Whereas it has pleased Almighty God to call to His mercy our late Sovereign Lady, Queen Elizabeth II, of blessed and glorious memory, by whose decease the crown of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland is solely and rightfully come to the Prince Charles Philip Arthur George. We, therefore, the Lords spiritual and temporal of this realm, and members of the House of Commons, together with other members of Her late Majesty's Privy Council, and representatives of the realms and territories, aldermen and citizens of London and others, do now hereby, with one voice and consent of tongue and heart, publish and proclaim that the Prince Charles Philip Arthur George is now, by the death of our late sovereign of happy memory, become our only lawful and rightful liege lord, Charles III, by the grace of God of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and of his other realms and territories, King, head of the Commonwealth, defender of the faith, to whom we do acknowledge all faith and obedience with humble affection, beseeching God, by whom kings and queens do reign, to bless His Majesty with long and happy years to reign over us. God save the King.
God save the King.
I now invite those on the platform to sign the proclamation.
First to sign, the Prince of Wales. Her Majesty the Queen Consort. Signing, Camilla R. Regina, Queen. The Lord President of the Council. The First Lord of the Treasury and Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. One of the great officers of state, holding an appointment that goes back into the history of time, the Archbishop of Canterbury. It will be his responsibility to crown the new king. His signature, Justin Cantuar, cross, cross. Cantuar, the Latin for Canterbury. The Archbishop of York. His signature, Stephen Ebor, cross, cross, Archbishop of York. Lord Privy Seal. Later on, the gathering of all those present will be added with their signatures to this document. All of them invited to sign as they've witnessed the announcement of the death of Queen Elizabeth II. And they are formally acknowledging that this be read out to the kingdom to confirm the new king. Finally, the Earl Marshal of England, the Duke of Norfolk, who is responsible for organising not only the state funeral of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, but will be organising the coronation of His Majesty the King.
Drafts of 8 orders of council. 1. Ordering the proclamation to be printed and published in specialist supplements in the London, Edinburgh and Belfast Gazettes. 2. Directing the Lord Chancellor to affix the Great Seal to the proclamation proclaiming His Majesty King Charles III. 3. Directing the kings, heralds and pursuivants of arms to attend at the Court of St. James to proclaim His Majesty King Charles III. 4. Directing the Lord Mayor, the Court of Aldermen and Commons of London to attend at the Royal Exchange to proclaim His Majesty King Charles III. 5. Directing His Majesty's Secretary of State for Defence to give directions for the firing of guns at Hyde Park as soon as His Majesty is proclaimed. 6. Directing the Constable of His Majesty's Tower of London to give directions for the firing of guns at the Tower of London as soon as His Majesty is proclaimed. 7. Directing His Majesty's Secretary of State for Scotland to cause the proclamation for proclaiming His Majesty King Charles III to be published in Scotland. 8. Directing the Clerk of the Council to issue circular letters for causing His Majesty King Charles III to be proclaimed are hereby approved, and that concludes the business for this part of the Council. I now invite the deputation party to accompany me to wait on the King in the Council chamber.
With echoes of history, another page has been written. The Prince of Wales and the Queen Consort.
Continue the tradition of surrender.
Members of the Council who form the Cabinet at any one time. King George VI, when he attended his accession council after the abdication of his elder brother, King Edward VIII, was extremely nervous at this point because he had an impediment in his speech. We know that the Prince of Wales does not, but he generally has a very emotional approach to moments of family sadness, and he clearly was dealing with that yesterday when he addressed the nation for the first time as king. The throne, you will notice, has the cipher of the late Queen. I was mentioning earlier that the College of Arms, working closely with the royal household and the King's advisors, will be designing a new cipher for the new reign. It will have CR, Charles Rex, with the Roman numeral 3, perhaps, or whatever the new king and the College of Arms decides. And it will be ensigned by a royal crown. And it will appear just as the late Queen's cipher appeared just about everywhere, on post boxes and in England particularly, and other parts of the United Kingdom. In Scotland too, the cipher can perhaps come back. The E2R did not apply to Scotland because Elizabeth I had never reigned over Scotland, but that is different for King Charles as we wait for the arrival of His Majesty through that left-hand door, which is where the waiting room for the King is. And there's only a few doorways from Clarence House. There are routes through from different parts of the royal palaces here, which is why we haven't seen any royal arrivals publicly. The murmur of conversation between people who have been foes in Parliament, between different archbishops who have been serving at Canterbury and York over the years, all of them perhaps with their memories of their talks and meetings with the late Queen, and all recognising that this is a significant moment for the evolution of a monarchy that has woven a line through the tapestry of time for this country, back to monarchs like old King Cole, Kenneth MacApin of Scots, and the Princes of Wales, and the old High Kings of Ireland. And in the new king are so many of those lines of descent. And in the first act that we will see the king invited to take part in, which is an oath, we will feel that history too, as he is asked to undertake to protect the independence of the Church of Scotland and its privileges. Once again, the king will come in and he will have the chance then to make his statement to those assembled Privy Councillors here and reflect upon the Queen's reign and the loss that we all feel at her passing. So when he enters the throne room, all present will bow. The King will make his declaration, after which the Lord President will ask leave to publish the declaration of His Majesty. And then he will be asked to make the oath relating to the Church of Scotland. He will read out the oath, holding a testament in his uplifted hand, and he will sign 2 parchments as copies of that oath. And one will be kept down in the United Kingdom archive, and the other sent to Scotland, to the Court of Session, to be kept in the books of the Sederant, which are the records of the Court of Session in Scotland, and the other preserved in the Privy Council Register. A copy of the Scottish Oath will, of course, be sent later to the moderator of the General Assembly of the Church of Scotland. The moderator, interestingly, was preaching at Crathy Church the last week
I have with humble
too long, and they are by nature functionary. Business can therefore be dealt with quite quickly. It's a very richly decorated part of the palace with red damask walls, all in hangings, surrounded by all these amazing paintings, monarchs of the past, and the king will and in the new king are so many of those lines of crime in the books of the Sederant, which are the records of the quarter session in Scotland. In the
business for part 2 of the Council. Your Majesty, to make your declaration.
My lords, ladies and gentlemen, it is my most sorrowful duty to announce to you the death of my beloved mother, the Queen. I know how deeply you, the entire nation, and I think I may say the whole world, sympathize with me in the irreparable loss we've all suffered. It is the greatest consolation to me to know of the sympathy expressed by so many to my sister and brothers, and that such overwhelming affection and support should be extended to our whole family in our loss. To all of us as a family, as to this kingdom and the wider family of nations of which it is a part, my mother gave an example of lifelong love and of selfless service. My mother's reign was unequaled in its duration, its dedication and its devotion. Even as we grieve, we give thanks for this most faithful life. I am deeply aware of this great inheritance and of the duties and heavy responsibilities of sovereignty which have now passed to me. In taking up these responsibilities, I shall strive to follow the inspiring example I have been set in upholding constitutional government and to seek the peace, harmony and prosperity of the peoples of these islands and of the Commonwealth realms and territories throughout the world. In this purpose, I know that I shall be upheld by the affection and loyalty of the peoples whose sovereign I have been called upon to be, and that in the discharge of these duties, I will be guided by the counsel of their elected parliaments. In all this, I am profoundly encouraged by the constant support of my beloved wife. I take this opportunity to confirm my willingness and intention to continue the tradition of surrendering the hereditary revenues, including the Crown Estate, to my government for the benefit of all, in return for the sovereign grant, which supports my official duties as head of state and head of nation. And in carrying out the heavy task that has been laid upon me, and to which I now dedicate what remains to me of my life, I pray for the guidance and help of Almighty God.
I have with humble duty to crave your Majesty's permission for the publication of your gracious speech.
Approved.
Concerning the security of the Church of Scotland.
I understand that the law requires that I should, at my accession to the Crown, take and subscribe the oath relating to the security of the Church of Scotland. I am ready to do so at this first opportunity. I, Charles III, by the grace of God of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and of my other realms and territories, King, Defender of the Faith, do faithfully promise and swear that I shall inviolably maintain and preserve the settlement of the true Protestant religion as established by the laws made in Scotland in prosecution of the claim of right, and particularly by an act intituled An Act for Securing the Protestant Religion and Presbyterian Church Government, and by the acts passed in the Parliament of both kingdoms for union of the two kingdoms, together with the government, worship, discipline, rights and privileges of the Church of Scotland. So help me God.
I now invite your Majesty to subscribe both copies of the instrument, confirming the oath has been taken.
Noting that the King is signing Charles Rex, Charles R.
I now invite the witnesses to His Majesty's oath to sign both copies of the instrument.
And for the first time, the Prince of Wales signing William P for Princeps, which is the Latin for prince. You will note that for an order in council to be approved by the monarch, just the simple word approved makes it enacted. And the remaining business will be thus attended. In the background, while the signatures, particularly the Secretary of State for Scotland, the Right Honourable Alistair Jack, you can hear in the background the music of the Coldstream Guards as the King's Guard is forming up in Friary Court for the proclamation to be read out by Garter King of Arms later on. The First Minister of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon, signing the two documents.